What I'll just explain in a couple of minutes about what we do and why we do and how we do. So one of the primary
From PRS.
I work with PRS Legislative Research, which we started in 2005. So we are in our 10th year. The primary purpose of starting PRS was a simple argument. It is that we expect our parliament to function well for our democracy to function well. Parliament consists of members of parliament. They have to address a wide range of issues. I mean, if you just look at what they have to address now, there are very technical issues such as GST, such as the electricity bill, and there are other issues like social level issues, like there is a bill for rights of people with disability, there's a juvenile justice bill, so there's a wide range of issues. It's obvious that no single human being can be an expert across all these issues. So they need research support to help them make take informed decisions. We looked around. In most advanced democracies, there are systemic ways of providing research support. Of course, the most organized in a sense is the United States. There is a group called the Congressional Research Service, which has 700 people, $100 million budget, which sits inside the Library of Congress. The UK, one can argue that it's a much simpler society than India is. It's about the size of, it's smaller than Maharashtra actually. There are 80 researchers within the House of Commons. India, the Indian Parliament, has a library which is an excellent reference service, but doesn't do any analytical research on bills coming up in Parliament and give that to MPs. On an individual basis also, MPs have absolutely no research support. They have now a grand amount of 30,000 rupees a month to hire all staff. So you can assume what they can get for that. So we said, if this is how we have equipped our parliamentarians, it's rather unreasonable to expect them to deliver good results. So can we fill the gap? So that's the idea, and we set up PRS to try to fill the gap. Some of the things we learned from the experiences of others abroad, one very key part was that to be acceptable and to be credible across different ideological and political viewpoints, we should not recommend any position. We should not advocate any position. We should be absolutely analytical and stop at the analysis, and even between the lines not take a position. So we are extremely careful of being completely non-partisan, not put out any public view. So unfortunately in India, people conflate individuals with their institutions. So in all my, since I head the institution, in all my public conversations, I stick to that view. So I will not take a particular position even today. I will give you different perspectives and different analytical ways of looking at the issue and what are the issues there. I'm sticking to the funding aspect because I think that is the critical point of this. First, if you are a not-for-profit in India, what are the different funding options available? Let's list them out. Broadly speaking, I think there are 5. One is Indian donations. Second, foreign donations, which come through FCRA. A third, which has come up more recently in a statutory way, the CSR story, which is anyway Indian donations, but it's now a compulsory part for companies, so I'm calling it separately. A fourth is revenue generating activities which not-for-profits can do, which also can fund our activities. And a fifth, of course, is the government itself. And I'm just going to go through them and what's the issues behind each of this. I'll address the fifth first, the government. For most not-for-profits who are in the policy space, I personally find it problematic to have government funding. We don't have government funding. Very simple reason. In most issues, government is a stakeholder and wants to push a particular agenda. And that is its job. I mean, it has been elected to push an agenda. But if you are analyzing it, there may be times when you need to analyze it without pushing the government's agenda. And government funding at that time can be problematic because they can put pressure on you to do certain things in a certain way at the threat of removing funding. We have seen that happen repeatedly to many institutions, which have many of them have refused to bend to that too. So when we started PRS, and since they know this better, I can explain that. One of the pieces of advice we got was, don't set up something of your own. Find some credible organization that can incubate you, so that by the time you get this, otherwise by the time you get these permissions, your first round of funding will get over, you'll have nothing to show, nobody's going to fund you, and it'll shut down. So we looked around, and the Center for Policy Research, which I think many people know, a very credible organization in Delhi, we talked to several think tanks, but for various reasons, CPR worked well. One very important reason, Center for Policy Research as an institution has no ideology. It's a collection of individual faculty. Various of them have various ideologies, but the institution doesn't. Like CSDS. I'm sure CSDS has people with...
CSDS is very ideological.
But I think there are people with different ideologies who sit inside CSDS. And you're free to disagree internally. So CPR had that, and we were there for the first 7 years. And the idea was, once we are stabilized, we will move out. And because this deserves to be an institution of its own, so we set up a Section 25 company, etc. So in CPR, they are part of the ICSSR, so they get the government funding as one of the 27 ICSSR institutions. And I don't know why. I mean, one never knows why, the precise reason, but in the random selection of institutions that are called for CAG audit, CPR was audited 3 consecutive years in an absolute random draw of lots. Okay, that's a fact. Okay, now one doesn't know how random numbers work. Okay, so one can find one's own interpretation of why that happened. Fortunately, CPR has nothing to hide, so they couldn't find anything wrong, but they still came and audited every time. So that is the sort of pressure government funding sometimes brings in, because what it does is, I mean, let's say if we are asked that, what will happen? We have nothing to hide. You can audit, you can do anything. But what happens is, most not-for-profits are thinly staffed at the administrative and at the senior levels. If 50% of my time goes away in managing these auditors, it's 50% of my time not doing the work I'm supposed to be doing. So that is the harm it does to the institution. Not really something wrong being found, there's nothing wrong being done. The second source, FCRA. I think if you look at it analytically and we go back, the FCRA original act was in the 1970s during the emergency time, when FERA and FCRA were both came in around the same time, FERA for the for-profits and FCRA for the not-for-profits. As the economy opened up, FERA was removed, replaced by FEMA. So it's no longer regulation, it is more, most things you can do in an automatic route, and it's more a reporting requirement rather than a prior permission system. For not-for-profits, so for the for-profits, the system was liberalized, made easier. For the not-for-profits, the 2010 FCRA is far more stringent than the 1970s FCRA, so the situation was made more stringent. I don't know why. If you look at it as what happens there, now I'll just give you an example. What's the issue with FCRA? Suppose I am a shady character and I have a shady funder abroad who wants to fund me. What can I do today? Very easy. I will claim that I am a consultant or I am an exporter, and I will have some documentation and get the money in through the FEMA route. I will probably give an award for being a great exporter and improving India's foreign exchange. If I am an honest guy and I have a good, credible foundation, neither of us will do this, and we will go through the entire stringent mechanism, including the harassment and various other things going through FCRA. So FCRA only catches the good people and harasses them, and doesn't catch the bad people, if you look at it that way. So I don't think it's an effective law. So there's something fundamentally problematic with the laws. The intention may be whatever, but anyone can easily get through it. And just to give you a scale of the problem, the amount of money that comes from foreign donors into India compared to the trade flows is about 1/100th. So it's very easy to get it through trade flows without anybody knowing. That's much, much, much larger. The second issue is the definition itself of what is foreign, because when you look around, if I'm looking at, it says, in terms of individuals, it's simple. Any Indian national is Indian, everybody else is foreign. In terms of corporate entities, if 50% plus shareholding is held by non-Indians, it's a foreign company. Therefore, if you do not have FCRA approval, you cannot take money from such foreign multinationals as Infosys Limited, as ICICI Limited, as HDFC Bank, as HDFC Limited, and so on. So what we have ended up doing is, we have liberalized the foreign investment regime, opened it up for FII and FDI investment, and on this side, we have called all of them foreign. So any large, credible, what we usually think are Indian companies are FCRA donors. So that has restricted that set of funding too. Coming to the second, okay, now of course, the bigger issue which is going to hit next year, I'm waiting for the fun. We don't have FCRA, so I will be on the sidelines and watching the fun. Registration, they have changed it valid for 5 years. You have to renew every 5 years. The act came into force in 2011, so 2016, huh?
Yeah, 16.
16, something like 17,000 or 15,000 or some large number of thousands of people are up for renewal at the same time, and these people who have a very small staff, who can't process a few hundred a year, have to do a few more than 10,000 in a short span. So I'm watching the fun. Let's see what happens. The third source is Indian donations. Here, it's much neater. You typically need, you actually don't need anything. Anybody can give you usually, but what donors require is an ATG. Therefore, anybody can give you money. If you don't have ATG, they just don't get a tax deduction. So it's not a regulatory requirement, but donors, if they need a tax deduction, most people like that, need an ATG. If you want to be called tax exempt, you need something called 12A under the Income Tax Act. But again, that's your choice. You can choose not to be tax exempt and not to get, but then you won't get money from foundations because most of them ask for it. So 12A and ATG. Again, the standard problem with FCRA as well as these is all these permissions, the guidelines are not very clearly written up, which means there's huge discretion to the person giving the permissions. And so here is the income tax officers at various places. So given that there is no guideline, given that there is discretion, there is the old formula which I read somewhere, which says monopoly plus M plus C equal to M plus D equal to C, monopoly plus discretion equal to corruption. So that's what happens. In many cases, not always, we got our ATG without paying any money at all. We were, I guess, lucky to hit upon a particular income tax officer who happened to be honest. Well, if you had hit upon somebody else, we would have had trouble, because we wouldn't have paid up. So that's the problem. The fourth source is the CSR activity, which is now under the New Companies Act. Now here, conceptually, I think it's a completely flawed idea. It's I would go to the extent of saying it is something which is internally inconsistent. How can you have compulsory voluntary donation? If the government wanted corporates to be a larger participant, they could have easily said, well, income tax rate for corporate is 30%, let it be 32%. We'll take the 2% and let the government will decide how the money is. And that would be at least internally consistent. Then the second problem with that is the way they have framed it and the way the rules have come. So there is a list of activities to which you can give, which basically means there's no innovation, which basically means that somebody in the Ministry of Corporate Affairs will have to be convinced that a particular type of activity is worthy of being given. There could have been alternatives. They could have easily said something much simpler, say, if you have ATG, which means you have been certified by someone else as being a body which is doing charitable work, then money given to you will be considered under CSR. Instead of that, they have gone through this route, maybe because they want more discretion. Who knows why they have done that? The last set of funding possibility is the revenue generating activities. Here, this was fairly simple till, I don't remember the year, I think 2007 or 8 or something like that. When in the budget, they put in a limit of 10 lakh rupees, that can be the maximum revenue that you can earn and still be called a tax exempt entity. They have increased it to 25 lakh. So 10 lakh has become 25 lakh now. What's the problem here? The issue here is looking at the receipt side and not on the expenditure side or the distribution side. They could have had a very simpler thing which was earlier, which is that if I am an entity which is not giving any benefits to the sponsors of the entity, all the money that is generated from whatever sources, be it donations, be it revenue, is invested in the activity for which I have been given a tax status as being charitable in nature, then it should be valid. And you can always keep an eye on that. Instead, they have put this cap. What does that result in? It hits potential sustainability of organizations, because you are on a forever treadmill of raising donations. Even if you have a particular way of, let us say, substituting the donations with certain revenue generating activities which can go towards the charitable work. So that's a basic problem. Yeah. So these are the 5 different ways, and all are problematic in their own way. The issue is for each not-for-profit to figure out a proper balance between these. Just before I conclude, I'll just take a couple of minutes, not more than that. I'll just tell you our own story of what happened. So we started, as I told you, in CPR. It's quite nice to be idealistic and say that I will not take foreign funding. We looked around, nobody Indian was willing to back us. And for something like this, at the end of the day, you can't run something without money. You need money. Our first funders were the Ford Foundation. And they funded us for the first 2 years and then 3 years, and at least, I mean, you may choose to believe me or not choose to believe me, but let me, at least from my side, say that they did not know what we were doing. There was absolutely no attempt to influence. They did not know what we were doing except what we gave them as a quarterly report. They needed an annual. We gave them a quarterly report of activities we have done, not what we are planning to do. So they have absolutely no. Now, again, in the sort of work we do, there's always a potential question. X is funding you. X has a particular object. I mean, anybody funding typically would be high net worth or a foundation or a company. They will have certain objectives. You are working in the legislative policy space. Would you be using your access to push their objectives? That is a question that can be asked. So the onus is on us to put enough checks in place that cannot happen. So we have a number of checks, including the fact that any funder is a disqualifier to be on our board. So unlike many people where the funder gets onto the board, we will not provide any access between funders and any of the legislators, because we work with legislators. We do not even have one-to-one correlation between a funder and an activity. Money goes into a pool, it just goes out of a pool. We want to have 10% as a maximum from any single person. Now it's still not reached there. From 100% we have moved down to this largest funder being about 16-17%. We should be in a year or two expanding the base less than 10, hopefully 5. So various checks one can put in place into funding to protect yourself against the accusation of being someone else's stooge, to put it in that sense. Okay, thanks, I'll stop there.
My name is Kanan Jaiswal, and I'm an independent, worker in the field of anti-corruption and rule of law. I want to establish, as I said. This for Mr. Madhavan. Dr. Madhavan, if I can say that. Well, you had said that, some company which had, CPA, Center for Policy Research, which is getting grant from the government, but they were audited by the CAG, and the way you described it appeared that you were against that kind of audit, and you considered that as a harassment. I think that is not. It is any government money, particularly the central government, can be audited. The grants can be audited by CAG, and CAG was very much well within its rights to do that, and that should not be questioned. We should leave something at least above questioning, and CAG is one. Number two, any other questions? You also said that people can raise money, by not doing any export and showing it as export receipts. But it's a criminal activity. One should not even talk about that. That FCRA route is better than that because that's a criminal activity. There's Hawala and criminal. So we are not considering that at all. Number two. Number three, you said that Ford Foundation didn't know what you were doing. Still they were funding you. Why at all they should? Number four, you said that you were not a FCRA company, but but you were taking money from Ford Foundation. So how come you're not? Okay.
I'll answer all four. First one, I have absolutely no objection.
Add little bit so that
Yeah.
you can take up, because
Yeah.
take up the issue I wanted to.
Yeah.
Anybody else who has questions?
Very simple, I want to add to him, and I want to make very sure that I heard you correctly. You said for first 3 years, Ford Foundation funded you. They did not know what they are doing. You only submitted quarterly report. Is that correctly I heard? If I have heard that correctly, I'm very concerned. Is it the format of Ford Foundation funding that they fund anybody, and I could also go that they will fund me without knowing what I'm going to do? That's very important factor for this audience to know. Because I would like to go today or tomorrow.
I'll answer. You can look at outside.
Yeah. So, there is a set of questions. Let me just
Questions I have asked. Yeah.
Only for
Yeah,
Madhavan.
four.
I lose track, so let me answer these. Because then I'll miss something and I'll be misunderstood.
as not answering. So I don't want to go through that. Okay. Because I think that maybe I was not very clear in what I said, so let me explain. Firstly, the CAG part. I have absolutely no conceptual problem with CAG auditing people. CAG should audit government funded thing. My question is, income tax does your scrutinies, correct? I have no objection in income tax doing scrutiny. But if the same person in a randomized manner is scrutinized every year, when you scrutinize, let's say 5% of the people, and the same person is hit every year in the 5% year after year after year, then one has certain misgivings. So my question is not that they were called in, but if you look at all the institutions that they audit where they have funded, and they have funded about 5% of the total amount, at a randomized number, and if the random thing comes every year, year after year, then one has certain questions. Okay. If it comes once in 3 years, one has no questions. That's my first point. So my question is, was that really random or was somebody targeted? The second part, FCRA, okay, we were, as I explained, part of CPR. So when we first went to, and I'll answer the Ford and this together because that's together. So when we started, we got funding from Ford Foundation. We of course put in a proposal. Proposal had a set of things they will do. They funded based on our proposal. The proposal was sent to the Ministry of Home Affairs. We are a unit of CPR. Through the CPR, it was approved for FCRA funding. We got the funding and we operated under that. Okay. Now, when I said that they did not know, I'll explain what I mean. We are working on, let us say, a set of legislation. Let's say the FCRA bill comes up. I am not going to tell them upfront that these are the 3 specific bills I am working on, and do you have any view there? I am going to tell them after I have published the bills, put it out in the public domain, everything is on the website, I am going to give them a copy of that this is what the specific thing I did. What I get funding for is, I am going to analyze bills which have been introduced in Parliament, not which specific bill and what I am going to write on them. So that's that was my this thing about prior and post. So I give them a quarter as this thing, and obviously an annual report, which is that requirement in their format. Okay. So what was the last FCRA? Sorry, one more was there.
Talking about this trade receipt and
Trade receipt part. No, my question, yeah, exactly. My simple point about that is simple. Okay. I am saying that if I am a for-profit organization, okay, I worked before PRS, I worked for 10 years as an investment banker. I understand finance. That's one thing I understand, including 5 years in an, I don't know whether to call it an Indian company or a foreign company. It was an ICICI subsidiary. Okay, I think at that time it was an Indian company. Today it's a foreign company. Okay, and 5 years in clearly a foreign company. It was Bank of America. Okay, but I understand finance. What I can tell you is there are very easy and legitimate and fully legal ways for me to act as a consultant, consult with a foreign person, get a consultancy fee, file returns, disclose everything, it's legal and I can get money. But it is called for profit. Instead of a fee being paid by a consultant, even now, if it's a fee from somebody, it is not FCRA. For the same activity, if it's a donation for the activity, it's FCRA. I find that somewhere conceptually problematic, because if a guy wants to, I do exactly the same activity, he says, I'll give you fees, it's okay. He says, I'll give you a donation, it's not okay. Why? Activity is the same, funder is the same, I am the same, everything is, it's the same. Once again. No. Once again, if somebody says, write these legislative briefs, okay, I will pay you a fees for you to write it and put it up in the public domain. Put it out, I am giving you a fee. I am perfectly valid. I don't need FCRA. Okay, exactly the same thing I'm doing. But if I do it as a donation, it's the same. So my problem is, okay, today it's not that I'm personally affected today, because my organization doesn't do it anyway. I'm just putting it out. I have it doesn't matter to my organization how it works. I'm just putting it out as a conceptual problem that to an identical activity, because of nomenclature, if it is being distinguished in law in two different ways, then there is something inconsistent about our Indian legal code. We have to either put both no or both yes. That's what I'm saying. We are inconsistent.